My name's Emma, and I'm just your regular 30-year-old nurse. I fell for Alex, a university teacher with the kindest eyes you've ever seen. Now, his family? That's a whole other story. His dad, Robert, is a big shot in the antique world, and his house? It's like stepping into a museum, each room crammed with stuff older than my grandma. The first time I walked into that house, I swear every step echoed. Paintings stared down from the walls, but the one that really got your attention was the portrait of Alex's mom, Maria, hung up like she owned the place. It was clear from the get-go she didn't approve of me. She had this way of looking you up and down, making you feel an inch tall. "So you're the nurse," she said, her voice all cool and unwelcoming. "I suppose you do, well, with what you have." I tried to smile, but it was tough. Alex squeezed my hand, his way of saying, "Hang in there." Then there's Lila, Alex's sister, the family's little princess. She doesn't work, just flits around from one party to another, living off Daddy's money. Another day, another dollar. She'd laugh, flipping her hair. Well, not for me. I don't do dollars, I spend them. Robert usually kept out of the drama, buried in his books or cleaning some ancient vase. But even he couldn't hide the disappointment when he looked at Lila or the way Maria treated me. One day, we were all sitting in the living room, which felt more like sitting in a stuffy history lesson, with all the antiques glaring down at you. Maria was holding court as usual, talking about some auction or another. "Emma, darling, do try to keep up," she'd say, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness. "I know these things are probably beyond your pay grade." I bit my tongue, trying not to snap back. Alex was talking to his dad about some university stuff, trying to stay out of the firing line. And Lila? She was on her phone, probably texting her latest boyfriend or shopping online for things she'd never use. "Ugh, Daddy, I need more money," she whined, tossing her phone down. "Life is so expensive when you have taste." Robert sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was trying to ward off a headache. "Lila, we've talked about this. You need to start taking responsibility." "Oh, lighten up," she shot back, rolling her eyes. "It's not like we're poor." The tension in that room could have cut glass. I often wondered how Alex turned out so normal, growing up in a house like this. But then, he'd catch my eye and give me that little smile that said, "We're in this together," and somehow, I felt like we could take on the world. That's our life, teetering between normalcy and the madness of the House of Antiques. Every visit was a tightrope walk of polite smiles and biting tongues, but it was our life, and we were in it together. After what felt like the millionth awkward dinner at the in-laws, Alex's phone buzzed with a message that had him up and grabbing his coat like the house was on fire. "It's Dad. Something's gone down with Lila," he muttered, his voice tight. I threw on my jacket, my heart hammering. Whatever it was, it sounded bad. The drive over was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts, the night pressing in around us. We got to the house, and the scene was chaos. Robert was pacing, his face like thunder, while Maria was on the couch, her makeup smeared from crying. And Lila? She was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" Alex demanded, going straight to his dad. Robert looked up, his eyes red. "Lila, she stole a piece from my collection. Tried to sell it to some local dealer." I gasped. Even for Lila, that was low. "Why would she do that?" I asked, more to myself than anyone else. "Because she's spoiled and selfish." Maria snapped from the couch, her voice sharp with anger and something else, shame, maybe. Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking like he was trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Is she here?" Robert shook his head. "No, she took off. But not before the buyer recognized the piece. An old friend of mine." "So, what now?" Alex's voice was flat, like he was bracing himself for the worst. "Now," Robert said, his voice suddenly steel, "now we deal with it. She's brought the police to our doorstep. This is serious." The weight of his words hung in the air. This wasn't just family drama anymore, this was real, legal trouble. Maria stood up, her usual poise gone, replaced by a frantic energy. We have to protect her. She's our daughter. And what about the family's reputation? What about right and wrong? Robert countered, his voice rising. I felt like I was watching a tennis match, the argument bouncing back and forth with increasing intensity. But underneath it all, there was a sense of something breaking, something that couldn't be fixed with a few harsh words or a stern look. Alex stepped in, his voice calm but firm. Let's just figure out what to do next. Okay? We can't undo what's been done, but we can figure out how to move forward. Robert nodded, the fight draining out of him. He looked old, suddenly, the weight of his daughter's actions bowing his shoulders. We spent the rest of the night talking in low, tense voices, trying to come up with a plan. Lila had screwed up, big time, and now we were all caught in the fallout. It was late when we finally left, the house feeling more like a mausoleum than ever. The drive home was quiet again, but this time it was heavy, the air thick with unsaid things and worries about what the morning would bring. I looked over at Alex, his profile lit by the passing street lights. You okay? I asked, my voice small in the car. He glanced at me, a tired smile flickering on his face. Yeah, I'm okay. We'll get through this. We always do. But as we drove back to our little slice of normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that Lila's fall from grace was going to drag us all down with her. And I was scared, not just for us, but for what it would mean for the family we'd tried so hard to fit into, even when it felt like they'd never really let us in at all. It was a regular evening, or as regular as it could be with the recent family drama, when Alex got another one of those calls. I could tell by the drop in his face it was bad. He hung up and looked at me. Dad's kicked Lila out. What? Why? I was shocked. Robert had always been the type to keep the peace, no matter what. He wouldn't say over the phone. We have to go over there. Now. The house felt different as we walked in, like a storm had passed through, leaving everything off kilter. Maria was in the corner of the room, her usual stern demeanor crumbled into something small and fragile. Robert sat like a statue, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. What happened? Alex's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tremor of concern. Robert looked up, his face carved from stone. She did something unforgivable. The word hung heavy in the air, filling the room with a sense of dread. I felt my stomach twist. What on earth could Lila have done? Maria finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to hurt Robert. For the inheritance. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was one thing to be a bit of a brat, but this? This was monstrous. Alex looked like he'd been slapped. Hurt him? How? Robert shook his head. Doesn't matter how. What matters is she's no longer welcome here. Not after that. The conversation that followed was a blur of disbelief and anger. Alex and I left late, the house feeling more like a crime scene than a family home. As we drove home, the silence was suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice rough. Can you believe it? My own sister, and Dad, I've never seen him like that. I reached over and squeezed his hand. I'm here for you, you know that, right? He squeezed back. Yeah, I know. It's just, how did it get to this point? How did we not see it coming? I didn't have an answer for him. How do you see something like that coming? How do you prepare for the moment when someone you grew up with, someone you thought you knew, crosses a line so far there's no coming back? We got home and tried to carry on as normal, but the shadow of Lila's actions hung over us. It was there in the quiet moments, the pauses in conversation, the way Alex's eyes would darken whenever his family was mentioned. The days passed, but the tension remained, a constant, unspoken presence in our lives. We were all waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the next disaster to strike. But for now, all we could do was wait and hope that somehow, someway, we could find a path back to something like normal. Or at least, learn to live with the new normal that Lila's actions had forced upon us. The days had started to blend together when out of nowhere, Alex's phone shattered the silence of our morning routine. The look on his face said it all before he even spoke a word. "My dad, he passed away last night," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Shock coursed through me. Robert, with his stoic presence and antique-filled house, gone just like that? It felt surreal as we rushed over to the family home, the place now a stark reminder of what had been. We entered the house to find Maria, not in tears or sorrow, but with a cold, almost relieved expression. Her usual stern face had an added layer of calculation as she received the condolences. As Alex tried to console her, she shrugged off his comfort with a briskness that took me aback. Well, it was bound to happen. He was getting on, and with all the stress lately. Her voice trailed off, not with grief, but an unsettling pragmatism. Throughout the day, as people came and went, offering their sympathies, Maria seemed more concerned with discussing the practicalities of inheritance than mourning her husband. "Without a will, it's pretty clear how things will be divided," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "The majority should rightfully come to me and Lila." The way she spoke about the future, her future, with such anticipation was chilling. There was no love lost here, no tender memories shared. Just cold, hard anticipation for what she stood to gain. Alex was quiet, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. Not just for the father he lost, but for the mother who seemed to shed her mourning like an unwanted coat. As evening fell and the house emptied, the reality of the situation set in. The lack of a will meant a legal tangle, one that Maria seemed almost eager to dive into. Her eyes had a gleam I hadn't noticed before, a sharpness that was almost predatory. "We'll have to speak to the lawyer first thing," she said, her voice brisk and efficient. "Make sure everything is in order." Alex nodded, his usual warmth buried deep under layers of grief and shock. "Yeah, we'll handle it," he replied, his voice steady but distant. We left the house under the cloak of night. The once grand home now felt hollow, filled with the echo of a life that was suddenly and starkly over. The car ride home was silent, a heavy stillness between us. I reached over, holding Alex's hand tightly, a silent message of support and love. He squeezed back, a small thank you in a world that had turned upside down. But as we drove, the city lights passing by in a blur, a deep unease settled over me. Maria's cold detachment, her almost eager anticipation of the inheritance, it was all wrong. And as the reality of Robert's death began to settle in, so too did the realization that this was far from over. The battle for the future, for the legacy and memory of a man who'd meant so much to us, was just beginning. And it was going to be anything but straightforward. "Emma, Dad mentioned a will not long before he passed. He made it clear I was the main heir," Alex confided in me one quiet evening, a serious look etching his face. "Without it, Mom and Lila stand to inherit most of the estate. We have to find it before they do." The urgency in his voice propelled us to the family home the next day. As we approached, the usual somber grandeur of the house was replaced by a sense of foreboding. We walked in to find a scene of chaos, rooms torn apart, furniture overturned, and papers scattered everywhere. Maria and Lila were in the thick of it, their faces set in grim determination as they rifled through Robert's belongings. The air was thick with desperation and the sharp tang of greed. "What on earth?" I gasped, stepping over a pile of books. Alex's jaw tightened. "They're looking for the will. They want to destroy it." Maria looked up, her eyes darting between us. "It's for the best. If that will surfaces, everything will go to Alex. It's not fair. We deserve our share too." Lila, who was rummaging through a desk, didn't even bother to look up. "Finders keepers," she muttered, her voice laced with venom. Alex moved forward, his voice rising. "This is Dad's legacy we're talking about. It's not just about money or property. It's about respecting his wishes." But Maria was unyielding, her gaze cold. "Respect? He left us to pick up the pieces. If there's a will that cuts us out, then it's better off gone." The search continued, more frantic now. Alex and I joined in, not to help them destroy it, but to save it from their clutches. We turned over every document, peered behind every portrait, and checked in every unlikely place, the tension between us and Maria and Lila palpable. As the day wore on, the house transformed from a mausoleum of antiques to a battlefield of wills. The once still air was now filled with the sound of shuffling papers and the occasional sharp word. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Alex paused, his exhaustion written all over his face. "We have to find it, Emma. It's what Dad wanted." I nodded, my hands dirty and my spirit weary. "We'll find it, Alex. We have to." We left the house that day with nothing to show for our efforts, but a growing sense of dread. Without the will, Maria and Lila would indeed inherit the majority of Robert's estate, and the thought of his last wishes being so callously disregarded was more than we could bear. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, the weight of our failure heavy on our hearts. But the search was far from over. We knew that somewhere, hidden among the chaos and greed, was a piece of paper that held the key to honoring a man's last wishes. And we were determined to find it, no matter what it took. The days since the will's disappearance had been tough and tense. Then, one afternoon, a knock at the door broke the monotony. A courier handed Alex a parcel, his expression unreadable as he turned it over in his hands. "What is it?" I asked, watching the curiosity play out on his face. "It's from Dad," he said, his voice carrying a mix of hope and anxiety. He tore open the parcel to reveal a digital recorder. A message from his late father. We listened intently as Robert's voice filled the room, echoing from the little speaker. He spoke of his final wishes, his love for his family, and his hope for the future. The recording was heartfelt and clear, but as it ended, Alex's face fell into deep lines of concern. "This is it. This is Dad's will and his last words," he said. "But I know Mom and Lila, they won't give up easily. They'll deny everything or twist it to their advantage. We need something more compelling." I thought for a moment, an idea forming in my mind. "What about my sister, the medium? What if we invite her to a memorial for your dad? She could conduct a seance, maybe bring Dad's spirit through. It might just shake Mom and Lila enough to slip up or confess." Alex looked at me, skepticism warring with desperation in his eyes. "Do you think that would work? Would she come?" I nodded confidently. "She'll come. And if anyone can bring Dad's presence back, it's her. It might make Mom and Lila think twice about crossing us if they believe Dad's watching." The decision was made. We'd arrange a somber gathering to honor Robert, a memorial of sorts. But with my sister's help, it would be more than just a remembrance. It would be a chance to bring the truth to light, to confront the greed and deception head-on. The evening of the memorial, the room was draped in a somber ambience, softened only by the dim glow of candles flickering in the corners. My sister, the medium, had an air of mystique about her, draped in flowing robes that added to her imposing presence. As she entered the room, a hush fell over the relatives, their eyes wide with a mix of skepticism and awe. "Thank you for gathering here," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "Tonight, we seek closure and truth from beyond." As the lights dimmed, leaving only the candlelight to dance across the faces of the assembled family, my sister instructed everyone to join hands. I felt Alex squeeze my hand tightly, a silent signal of mutual support. With a deep breath, my sister began to invoke the spirit of Robert. The room was heavy with anticipation, every creak and whisper amplified in the charged silence. Then, at the perfect moment, I discreetly turned on the recording Alex's father had sent us. Robert's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the room, emanating from a hidden speaker. "My family," the recording began, "I speak to you beyond the grave to settle matters of my estate. There is indeed a will. In it, I have left the bulk of my property to my son, Alex. To my wife, Maria, I leave a modest monthly allowance." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Maria's face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock. Beside her, Lila's expression twisted into one of disbelief and anger. "And to my daughter, Lila, I leave nothing," the voice continued, stern and resolute. "Her actions, her attempt to poison me, have not only betrayed my trust, but have significantly worsened my health." The accusation hung in the air like a thick fog, settling over the room with a weight that was almost tangible. Lila stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her face a mask of rage and denial. "This is nonsense," she spat out, looking wildly around the room. "But know this," the voice of Robert continued, unfazed by the outburst. "The will is hidden within the house, in a place none would think to look." As the recording ended, the room erupted into chaos. Maria, tears streaming down her face, looked utterly defeated, her earlier composure shattered. Lila was shouting, her words a tangled mess of accusations and denials. The relatives were a mixture of shock and gossip, their eyes darting between the key players of this family drama. Alex stood, his face calm amid the storm. "We will find the will," he declared, his voice cutting through the noise. "And we will honor my father's wishes." The night ended with more questions than answers, the house abuzz with speculation and whispered theories. As the guests departed, leaving behind a trail of uneasy glances and hurried farewells, we were left to ponder the next steps. As we tidied up, the weight of the evening's revelations pressing down on us, Alex turned to me, his expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. "Thank you," he said simply, his hand finding mine. "It's what family does," I replied, squeezing his hand in return. After all that mess with the will and Lila trying to poison her dad, things around the house got real quiet, real quick. Lila took off into the night, scared stiff of the cops catching up with her for what she did. Can't say anyone was surprised. She was always a bit of a wild card, but this? This was something else. Maria, meanwhile, wasn't wasting any time feeling sorry for herself. Before anyone could blink, she started hauling out the fancy stuff from the house, piece by piece. Everything except her own giant picture hanging in the main room. It was like she was trying to grab what she could before the ship sank. But she didn't know what we found stashed behind her portrait. Alex and I were poking around when we found the will hidden back there, all official and legal-like, and some papers that pretty much proved what Lila did to her dad. You should have seen Alex's face when we found it. It was like Christmas came early. Reading the will, it was all there in black and white. Alex was getting the lion's share of everything. Maria was left with just a bit of cash to keep her going every month, and Lila? Well, she got a big fat nothing for her troubles. Maria packed up her bags and left the house, probably off to live a quieter life with her allowance. And Lila? Who knows where she ended up? Hiding out, probably, hoping the cops don't find her. So, there we were, me and Alex, left in this big old house. It felt weird, knowing everything that went down there. But we started fixing it up, making it feel more like ours. Less of a museum and more of a home, you know? One evening, as we were sitting down after a long day of cleaning and sorting, Alex looked at me and just said, "We did it, huh?" "Yeah," I replied, looking around at what was now our place. "We did it. Together." It felt good, sitting there with him, knowing we'd been through the ringer and came out the other side. The house had its ghosts, sure, but it was ours now. And whatever the future held, we'd face it as a team. That's what family does, right? That's what we were now. A real team.